We're going to talk about several topics tonight. And as you know, Insight Training is a thermography certified instructor cadre of firefighters from all around the country. We're going to give you a different background on things tonight, some of the topics that you probably have talked about before, but you're going to hear about thermal imaging, a little brief overview from me. And that's just to get you primed to pump for rules and tools with Joey Baxa about the understaffed response, which is near and dear to my heart because I grew up in a volunteer department where we didn't have that much, didn't have many people coming either. Thomas Anderson is going to fire us up with enhancing the search through using the concepts we teach through tactical thermal imaging. And you should be really fired up by that point. After you've searched for the victim, you should be ready to go to do the ultimate rescue, which is rapid intervention or regaining the upper hand in RIC with instructor Jake Latson, who has recently completed his level 1 thermography certification. He joins a very select few of firefighters who have that certification, so congratulations to him. And then we will have a roundtable discussion at the end. We've already had some questions submitted. If you'd like to submit questions after the presentation, you can do so in the chat room, and we will add that to the list. So without any further ado, so you're going to hear from myself, Joey, Thomas, and Jake tonight. And I'm going to give you a little background on each one. I'm blessed to work with each one of them. Each one of them has a particular passion or subject matter expert area that they've chosen to pursue. Thomas's is the search area. Despite his 3.5 years on an engine company with me, he's decided to go to the dark side and become a ladder man. So he's extremely knowledgeable in that, very passionate. You will pick up on that really quickly, and has done exceptionally well. Has taught all over the place and taught with us at Firehouse and lots of other places. He's been putting up with me for a little while now. Brother Joey has been putting up with me for a little while too. He's a captain in Buchanan, West Virginia, and he's also level 1 thermography certified. Got his not too long ago. He is an expert in dealing with 2 firefighters to as many as 6 firefighters, or maybe a maximum of 10. He'll correct me on that, on the fire ground from where he's at. Brother Jake is from Michigan, and he's going to fire us up about rapid intervention. But Jake is also a veteran firefighter as well, up in his area, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about his passion. And who's not with us tonight, but we don't want to leave anybody out, is brother instructor Terrence Shoemate, who is our also a level 1 thermography instructor, or certified instructor, and also he's our drone specialist. So move forward a little bit. So what we're going to talk about tonight is why all this stuff's important to you and how thermal imaging can help you. But before we go, we always start with the basics. The fundamentals are first, and Paul Combs says it best, that your fundamentals should be your foundation. There's no substitute for knowing the basics. So we are not here in any way, shape, or form to tell you that technology is going to replace a well-trained, critically thinking firefighter, period. As these 3 firefighters who went into a burning building with no point of reference, no search line, no hose line, and no one who's the designated adult, more importantly, they used the camera as their sole point of reference. What do you think happened when they needed the camera most? It failed. So why do I say that to you? Because it happened to me right before we went in through this doorway on a know-nothing room and contents fire where we pulled 3 victims out. And if the camera will fail on someone like us who preaches readiness and use words like always and never, which get you in trouble, this can happen to anyone. Notice that little red flashing bar at the bottom. That is the sign of a dead battery. That means you have less than 5 minutes. I learned a very valuable lesson that day. My battery was full at the beginning of the shift and left it on the doghouse of the engine company, which we ran medical calls all day, never turned it back on. But it was super hot that day, and a hot engine housing with a tick laying on top of it will act like a power drain and drain that battery. When I got off the truck and turned it on, it showed full battery. When we made it inside this apartment, the camera died. And guess where my extra battery was? In the charger. And I always keep one in my pocket. So I share my failures with you because I want you to understand that it can happen. But you need to know that your fundamentals are your foundation. And that's where we should start and always fall back on. So let me ask you a couple quick questions before we get into the meat of the material tonight. Which image would you prefer? The blurry firefighter at the top or the clear, crisp image of the firefighters at the bottom? Because the majority of the fire service today, about 70% of them, have a thermal imaging camera. And you think, well, that's great. That means there's 8,000 fire stations that don't. And the ones that do may have a camera that looks like that picture in the upper right-hand corner. You want to go search for your child or your loved one with a low resolution, older camera, because that's what the majority of the fire service has. How do we know that? Because we've been to 43 states and 9 countries and taught a ton of people online, and they continue to tell us, hey, we need to update our stuff. And it's 2020, and there are people still using cameras that are made in 2001 that look like a black and white TV on a stick. So here's the other issue that you need to be aware of. As we go through this material, you need to know there's 2 types of cameras being marketed or pushed to the fire service today. And you don't want to get caught up in the hype. The ones on the left are situational awareness cameras. They're designed for one purpose: to prevent firefighter disorientation. That's it. They're not designed to replace a decision-making camera, which is supposed to be in the company officer's hands. If you notice there's some page numbers on top of this, that's because we have a credentialed thermography-based curriculum that this comes out of that manual. Your situational awareness cameras are slow. They're 9 hertz or 16 hertz. You'll hear firefighters say, oh, it lagged terribly. And I'm like, have you ever met a patient firefighter in a fire? No. Well, this camera is supposed to give you situational awareness, help you find your way out. If it lags or takes time to catch up, it defeats its purpose. So be careful which one you buy, because certain ones out of the ones on that left-hand side, the FLIR K1, K2, Seek Fire Pro, MSA, iTech, or Scott Sight, will help you or hinder you. And I'm not going to bash manufacturers, but we can talk about specifics and criteria later. But the ones on the right, you need to realize, are decision-making cameras. They're higher resolution, faster processor rate, used for strategic decision-making. That's your lesson you need to take back to your decision makers. Don't let them buy an air pack mounted camera or a little small $600 to $1,000 camera and call it good. Because those cameras are no higher resolution than the cameras you had 15 or 20 years ago. That's a step backwards, not a step forwards. So we can fix that by staying educated. So you can use this stuff and what they're going to talk about tonight, from size up to making entry to search to flowing water more efficiently, searching for downed firefighters and rapid intervention and more. And like Brother Terrence teaches us, this is 150 feet off the ground with a drone thermal imaging camera that has 300,000 pixels. That is 3 times the amount of resolution you can get on the best handheld camera today. This was taken 2.5 years ago, if you want to know where we're at. So I'm going to ask you a very poignant question that you need to think about when my fellow instructors are talking to you tonight. What was the temperature of the last hallway you crawled? And why should that matter to you? I'm going to ask you to challenge your paradigm for a second. I am very passionate about what I believe in, my faith, my family, and the fire service. And I believe the fire service is a calling, not necessarily a career. Not a lot of people agree with that, but here's what you need to think about. If it is truly for them, why is 38% of the time the cameras left on the truck? Why are firefighters still not opening the nozzles they move down a hallway? Because they say it's not that hot. When you're in the best PPE money can buy, and little Jimmy's laying there in his pajamas on a couch burning alive. When you say it's not that hot, I think you need to realize that the citizen is inside of their home that used to be a place of refuge that is now a direct threat to their survival. And when we keep that nozzle closed, we are negligent. When you're not cooling and contracting gases and lifting that stuff off of the victims and stopping the pyrolysis of their contents, stopping the damage to their home, we are not fulfilling our mission, period. And you cannot do that with using your ears or your eyes or peeling your glove back or whatever methodology they taught us back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It is too late for that. It's time for us to start embracing that we need a device that helps us see a little bit better, and then put the device down and move forward with the task. So what's not being measured when we move through this? What did I just say? The victim does not have PPE and SCBA. I have watched it, and you can ask the instructors in this call here. Firefighters move from the front door right to the seat of fire and knock it out. Excellent at extinguishment. Problem was, went through 3 rooms, never cooled it off, never stopped the heat from coming down on that victim and their contents and their belongings. Never stopped that process. Great at putting a fire out. But what about the heat that was happening as we moved through there? You and I went through it unaffected. What about the victim laying on the couch or in the hallway? Nobody wants to talk about that. Oh, you're going to steam the victim. Let me tell you something. 3,400 parts per million of hydrogen cyanide and 1,200 parts per million of carbon monoxide, and anywhere between 1,200 and 18 degrees are radiating down on their skin, their flesh, and that gas is going in their lungs. 212 degrees of steam would be a blessing compared to us not opening that nozzle and letting that yellow line above their heads you're seeing in this picture, which is nothing more than a broiler that we were taught not to disturb. As it descends, it is killing everything in its path. And we have got to do a better job of that. So why is this important? This is a great video that instructor Joey Baxa showed with us from Buchanan, West Virginia, because you can't see this with the naked eye. That's a hole in the floor. I was taught you couldn't see that. What's pumping through that hole? Superheated convection currents from a fire beneath it. So tactical thermal imaging is the old transformer line. It's more than meets the eye because 2/3 of the heat in a fire are delivered in the infrared spectrum that you and I cannot see. You hear that? Cannot see it. So it's very, very important that we have to pay attention to what's going on. So does this matter to you? Absolutely. It should. So let me ask you a question, and you can give me a show of hands in the chat room. How well trained are we? I know some of you personally, and y'all are amazing. I just want to tell you that some of you that I know personally directly inspire me when I'm in my deepest, darkest places, because I see what you're doing and you're fighting the good fight and you're training, you're working out, you're doing a lot of stuff. And I surround myself with good people like that. So let's ask the audience, how much tick training has your department provided you before that camera was put in your hands or after the fact? Do you have a training program that trains on it annually with live fire? If you're not doing all this, practical evolutions and training your firefighters before you hand it to them, you're in violation of NFPA 1408, which is the thermal imaging training standard. And a lot of people say, well, we don't follow NFPA, it's not for practical application. Here's the problem with that. You're not going to follow a standard, but yet your department has the money to purchase equipment. So you're in effect saying that you can purchase something, but you don't have the money to train them on how to use it. How's that going to work in a court of law when they quote consensus standards? They don't care which one we choose exemption from. They're going to hold us to it, and they're already doing it. If you don't believe me, there's 2 court cases going on right now that will prove otherwise.
So you've probably taken like a smoke reading class.
I want you to listen to this quick little 1-minute explanation of why you need to pay attention.
From Dave Dodson or some of the other guys out there to teach it. But have you took a class on how to read heat? Like heat is a language, and you have to understand it. Tom Zen wrote an article called The Language of Heat. And in that article, he says, you have to know as much about what you're looking at as what you're looking through. So I'm holding a very expensive piece of technology, but if you don't understand what it's telling you, it's just an overpriced flashlight. It allows you to see heat or heat loss. And you have to understand the environment you're in, the contents, how it's made up, how the building's made, how everything works long before you put that camera in your hand. If you don't, let's go back and do some more fundamental stuff. And you have to understand this 3-letter acronym that is your life insurance. It's called Thermal Protective Performance. If you don't understand that, you don't take care of your gear, you're in trouble. I've seen more firefighters take better care of a Halligan than they have their turnout coat, their helmet, their hood, and their pants.
That's a true statement. Some of you said you hadn't had any formal training. How many of you have read the instructions on your turnout gear? How many of you knew that this training standard existed? Because it didn't exist till a few years ago. And I emphasize the word shall because those are legal words where it says a training program shall be implemented. You shall have written policy. You shall address training requirements. Somebody's drawing on my screen. Hey, I got a 10-year-old. I'm used to stuff being drawn. You should have an annual review of member competence and TI technology. All that stuff matters, okay? But if you don't do that and you say, oh, well, we can choose exemption to that, good luck. Because so far, when they've called us into the courtroom, it hasn't worked out well when we've chosen exemptions to things. And here's the other issue with getting new cool stuff like $1 million rescues and high-dollar extrication equipment and all that stuff with no training. Yeah, most throw out instructions for the equipment they are issued, and that's about it. This is basically like a map. If I'm reading a map, I need to have a legend to understand the keys and the symbols on it. A lot of you have laptops that have, updated maps and whatnot, give you hydrant locations, cool information like FDC stuff. All that's on there, which is valuable. But do you know what any of this stuff means on this camera? Because the majority of them will say, black's cold, yellow and red's hot. Not necessarily. It's not an always or never with these. You need to know what these symbols mean and what we teach, the 5 key attributes in thermal imaging mean and how they affect you. Because if you don't, you're just, like I said, you're holding an overpriced flashlight. When does your camera show color? When does it switch to low sensitivity? What's that spot temperature mean? Does that mean this whole environment is at temperature? No. What do those 4 battery bars mean? In this case, they're 30 minutes apiece. Never go in a fire with less than 50% battery life. Read the color palette, not the spot temperature. And if you don't know what the difference between high and low sensitivity is, by the end of this class, you'll know that that directly affects your ability to see and how that affects the performance and what kind of level of severity you're in. So we're great at extinguishing fires, but are we putting out the heat? Because here's something we don't know. There's a book called the Ignition Handbook, and it says the majority of modern contents start off-gassing at 200 degrees. Modern contents in a home today are made of what? Not wood and cotton, but synthetic materials. So at 200 degrees, they're producing vapors made of polyurethane, which is the same as gasoline. And that is pumping down this hallway in heat. This heat is hitting this stuff and causing it to pyrolyze, the thermal decomposition of a substance through the action of heat, or producing more flammable gases. So do you see why we should cool this off? Because this is zero visibility. I don't have to guess where the fire is. I don't have to not open the nozzle. I have to cool that environment and own that space, as Aaron Field says. Okay? So life, incident, and property. That's what we committed to do. Life safety, incident stabilization, and property conservation. But are we erasing the heat as we go? How many of these research reports have you read that the firefighters were unaware of changing conditions inside of the actual environment before things went bad? Wonder why? Remember what I said in that video? TPP. What's those 3 letters mean? Thermal protective performance. That's how good your gear is and how well it protects you. Too good. So good, these 2 firefighters moving in here with the nozzle closed never felt this 600 to 900 degrees of convection currents pushing down on them and nearly melting their face piece. And here's what I want you to think about the next time you're in a fire, when you question, what was the temperature of that hallway I crawled? Because pyrolysis doesn't just happen to contents. It happens to the victim. Your skin starts to decompose at 109 degrees. That's a good day in Texas. Property starts to break down at 200 degrees. By the way, your SCBA bottle, took me 6 years to get the information, is recommended not to be hotter than 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Yes, you heard that right. It's in the Luxfer manual. You ought to read up on that. It's pretty interesting reading. And the decomposition of your PPE begins as low as 160 to as high as 572. And your turnout gear is not tested higher than 600 degrees Fahrenheit. And nobody that I know is checking temperature before they move down that hallway. And let me ask you about this. What temperature is good for them? As my fellow instructors go through this material tonight, I want you to think about people like Will Tremaine. He was one of the 3 we brought out that night. He's the only one that lived. If you notice, his shirt says, "Rest in peace, Mommy." How long can they survive in a fire? I read and read and read. And the bottom line is, the greater the temperature, the greater the radiation, the greater the expansion of the gases, which are going where? To those victims' lungs. Okay? And if you read, you also learn a very troubling fact that fire victims that are in the fire's path died from the heat first, toxic smoke second, and humidity a distant third. And we're worried about steam. You hear me? Worried about steam. But if we cool the environment, we get the heat off of them, contract the gases, which is all that bad stuff, stop the pyrolysis, and we are doing what? As Aaron Field says, we are creating survivable space. Okay? Here's facts, ladies and gentlemen. Not my data, but facts. Your skin says, "Oh my gosh, that hurts" at 113 degrees. You're ready to punch somebody between 118 and 125. That's between 2nd and 3rd degree. A 2nd degree burn occurs technically at 131 degrees, which is when your gear is saturated with heat energy. When you're feeling painful bee sting-like sensations pushing through your gear, driving you to the floor, your gear is saturated and you are either receiving a burn or about to be. That's called alarm time. It's in the instructions in your turnout gear. And at 140 degrees, if we don't move away from that, our pain receptors are turned off. So if you're going to peel your glove back, not wear a hood or pencil the ceiling or do all that stuff, you can't feel any kind of temperature change above 140 because your skin has gone numb. And 116 degrees, your protein in your skin is coagulating or cooking. That's basically you're not getting that back. That's where they're going to have to graft you. Okay, that's thermal tissue activation. And if you've ever seen this little red manual, it comes with your brand new turnout gear. Don't be in a rush to tear it off and throw it in the trash. Read 2-4 through 2-6. If you're like I am, when I was done, I went home and apologized to my wife. Because in 22 years career and 27 years in the fire service, I realized I should have been dead. Because I was ducking and diving underneath it instead of cooling and conquering it and making a difference. And that's what we got to change. Okay. So, what temperature or level of heat's acceptable to firefighters? Here's the thing you want to get out of this as you move forward. Don't wait till you feel heat. You want to see the heat. Because here's something that should concern you. Your NFPA standards for your turnout gear allows for 50% of your entire body to get a second and third degree burn before your TPP is exhausted. Does that concern you that when you start to feel pain, that it is too late? And that is an industry standard? Because if you go into like commercial stuff, they only allow for 25%. But yet we allow for half of our body to be burned when our gear has exhausted all of its thermal protective performance. Doesn't sound like a good idea to me. Does it look like a good idea to do this? Look at these two brand new firefighters in brand new gear who just graduated from firefighter 1 and 2. This is their first fire. You see anything wrong here? This is what we teach. Don't open that nozzle. You're going to put my fire out. And then we get right up on top of it. And then we open the nozzle. What's happening the whole time they're sitting there? What's happening to the protection in their gear, their face piece? And Brother Jake will point this out in writ. Who makes the rescue if something goes bad in there? These guys. How much TPP do they have left if they needed it? Not very much. So remember this, you can read smoke, but you can't read temperature. Because look at this ISG footage. We're walking around the house. We got smoke pushing off this little mill house. Look through the smoke with a camera. Is that a big difference? Absolutely. The majority of that roof line has got major heat and fire pushing through it. Don't you want to see that before it sees you? How can we adequately do our job if we continue to neglect the most powerful side of the enemy, which is unseen? That's infrared energy or heat. It's affecting everything, and we're ignoring it. We're the only organization in history that believes that physics does not apply to us, period. That's a scary thought. And the world's going to figure that out, ladies and gentlemen. So what is extreme heat to us? You need to remember this. Your gear fails at a lot less and a lot lower temperatures than you actually realize. It doesn't matter if your PBI or Nomex or GX Extreme is going to protect you at 12 to 1300 degrees on your full 3 levels or 3 layers of gear. If your polycarbonate face piece begins to soften at 290 and fails at 447, and the average temperature at which your face piece failed was 356 degrees. You hear that? 350. That's what you bake cookies at. What good are we if we can't breathe? We're done. We go from rescuer to victim. And you move as you go from the front door to the fire. What's happening as you move and we're not cooling the space? This picture was taken in 2011. This is after 30 seconds from the front door to the fire room with leaving the nozzle closed. This is how much energy that firefighter absorbed in 30 seconds. And I asked him if he was hot. And he said, I never felt anything. Should that concern you? Yes, because by the time we do feel it, it's too late and you can't cool it off until you get out of it. You're a baked potato at that point. We're doing no one any good if we exhaust the ability of our gear to protect ourselves and we can't do our job. And this is what you should pay attention to. This is what's happening to us as we crawl down a hallway. And Instructor Anderson will enlighten you on this a little bit more in his class. This is super high velocity convection currents. You're taught to read smoke, volume, velocity, density, color, right? About velocity of heat. Look what's rolling out of this Connex box here. How hot was Mr. Thomas Anderson there? Look at his shoulders. He was only in there a few seconds throwing a couple pallets. What is the camera telling us? What is that fast moving gray stuff? Is gray cool? Absolutely not. How about the instructor wearing no gear, no helmet, telling, come over here and look. You think we've got some learning to do? By the way, they figured this out overseas about 15, 20 years ago. That is bad right there. That needs lots of water from the front door to the seat. Okay. So here's a question you need to think about. NFPA requires more than 70 tests for PPE to make sure you and I are protected. That's a lot of tests. You can go into it if you want. But what I want you to consider is this. How many tests do we have for them? How do you know it's too hot? How do you know that they're okay? You're going to pencil the ceiling. You're going to peel your glove back. You're going to wait till your ears start to hurt on your hood or not wear a hood. You're going to wait till your shoulders start hurting. The air in the bottle get hot. All those things. Do you think that's really reliable or empirically adequate? Because if you're feeling pain in some of the best PPE on the market, the victim is dying in their pajamas. They're not sleeping in Nomex Spider-Man pajamas. Matter of fact, if you look at most of the clothes we wear, they're flammable. That's why NFPA is a standard for your base garment. There's a reason you can't wear Under Armour stuff underneath your turnout gear. You should look at some of the burns firefighters have received for doing so. So penciling and using your senses to vary or gauge heat is a bad idea because penciling was disproven in 3 different research studies. 3, okay? And those of us who were taught to peel our glove back or stick our hand up in the smoke, let me ask you this question. If you think that's a good idea for measuring thermal severity, you think it's a good idea to let your child touch a stove to see how hot it is? Because that's basically what we're teaching firefighters. Hey, stick your hand on that, see how hot it is. What happens when you stick your hand up in a 600 to 800 degree convective current? What just happened to your hand? I spent 26 weeks teaching recruits to keep their gear on and button it up and make sure everything's covered up. And then we put them in a live fire and tell them to peel their gear back to use their body as a thermometer? I don't think that's going to go over real well. Okay. As I said, penciling was proved inadequate 3 times. U.S. Navy, University of Waterloo, Canada. We didn't believe either one of them, so UL had to disprove it in 2017 with the most profound statement that says a short burst of water cannot tell you gas temperatures or how hot it is. When you're checking for a return, it does not work as previously been taught. If it does not rain back down, there's many variables why. No ceiling, it could be too hot, could be over 212, but the majority of the fires you go in are going to be over 212. It's not giving you a temperature check. Okay, we're not compartment fire behavior trainers like they are overseas. They're surgically precise with their water. We are a binary methodology, all the way on, all the way off. Okay, and those of you who are worried about steaming the victim, that's been disproven numerous times, and as recent as the UL impact of fire attack utilizing interior and exterior streams on firefighter safety and occupant survival. Page 199, not my words. With no appreciable increase in moisture content at the 1 foot level, even after suppression, it is not possible the suppression is going to cause the victim further damage due to steam. Because if you can cook bacon on the floor, like in this picture, I think 212 degrees of steam is not your concern. Just my thoughts. So, in closing, when I'm flowing water, I want to flow with a purpose. I want to go straight to the target. The military thinks we're crazy because we go in buildings and we have no idea where we're going. When you conduct an interior attack, you should cool as you advance. You should know where your water is going and erase and bring the temperature down before you move forward. Flow and move, shut down and move. I don't care if you're O, T, Z, and N, but don't be a spray and pray or scream and shout and spray water all about. It's been proven over and over again, and yet we keep fighting the same fight. So which view do you think the citizens would rather have? Zero visibility, come find my victim or find my family member, or even with a cheap thermal imaging camera that's not designed for what we're doing here, I can still see where the heat is and possibly where the victim is. Which one would you want to have? Think about that. So, Brother Thomas is going to talk to you about search and how that can help you locate people 70% faster. I'm telling you, you can locate and put the fire out faster. You can control the environment. You can make it better for the victim, better for their property, better for you. It improves the tenability, makes everything better. So tell me why we're leaving it on the truck again. Tell me why we're not training on it. Tell me why we're not spending money on it when we got $1 million fire trucks and we can't buy a $3,000 to $5,000 device but yet there's 80-inch TVs and brand new recliners in the station. So if I do this, I am putting out the fire better, faster, and fulfilling the mission. Yet we don't want to spend money on it, and we don't want to do that because we want to keep doing this right here. I'm going to pencil a couple straight streams to the ceiling. No camera involved here. They're just being filmed. And then the coach is going to tell me, that's good, move forward. And I'm going to flow some water inside the doorway. And then I'm going to move forward again, and I'm going to leave 9 to 1200 degrees of superheated surfaces behind me with a 7x3 ventilation hole with tons of fuel inside of here. And we wonder why we keep getting our butt kicked. All it takes is looking both ways before we cross the street. Hit that semi with a big old bunch of water, get rid of that heat, get rid of the threat, make it better, erase the heat, make it better for them, for their property, and for you. Questions? See a couple people popped up in the chat room.